Winston Churchill did not want the separation of Germany and the spread of communism. However, he announced an Iron Curtain has descended in Europe. The Iron Curtain referred to the separation of communism and capitalism across Europe and how it was clearly divided as if there was an actual Iron Curtain. After World War II, at the Potsdam Treaty, Germany was divided into 4 zones. The Soviet Union had control of the East, while the Allied powers, the Americans, the British, and the French had control of the West. The Berlin Wall was put up to stop the spread of people from East Berlin to West Berlin, which separated West Berlin and allowed it to thrive as a democratic country, while East Berlin struggled with a poor economy and had little freedom under communism. The Berlin Wall was put up by the German Democratic Republic to stop the people of East Berlin from leaving the city. The people of the German Democratic Republic were communists. Thousands of people were leaving East Berlin and going to West Berlin. The people were leaving because they wanted to escape communism. The population of East Berlin was shrinking quickly. The German Democratic Republic put up the wall in 1961. Their reasoning for building the wall was an anti-fascist protection wall. However, the Berlin Wall was also supposed to better the relationship between the US and the Soviet Union because they would no longer be fighting for control and power. They would each get to control their own sector. This would prevent a Third World War. The people were outraged because they were not allowed to leave and they were stuck with communism. The Berlin Wall spanned over 27 miles and was nearly impossible to cross. The wall was built in 4 stages, starting with a very simple, makeshift barbed wire fence. The wall was built up to a more sophisticated wall. By the 3rd stage, it was a full concrete wall. The 4th and final stage of the wall was a 12-foot tall and 4-foot wide solid concrete wall. It was topped with a pipe to make climbing the wall extremely difficult. The wall spanned 27 miles on the border of East and West Berlin and 96 miles all around the eastern sector. On the east side of the wall, the 100 meters leading up to the wall was called the death strip. It was made of gravel and sand to show the footprints of anyone trying to escape. Armed guards on the east side surrounded the wall and were instructed to shoot anyone trying to escape immediately. Because the construction of the wall was so well thought out and protected, crossing it was very rare. The majority of the people who crossed over the Berlin Wall did it illegally. If you wanted to cross the border, you needed an interzone pass, which was very hard to obtain and very few people had one. Someone might get a pass if they were in the government and needed to travel to the other side. If you did happen to have one, you had to pass through Checkpoint Charlie. It was the only checkpoint where people were allowed to cross through. Those who did not have access to an interzone pass had to think of creative ways to cross the border. One family built their own hot air balloon and took it over the border. A more popular way of escape was to jump from buildings close to the border or by digging tunnels. In total, 5,000 people were able to cross the border. Most escapes were done in the early years of the wall when it was just a fence impossible to cross. Unfortunately, 100 people were killed while trying to escape by being shot in no man's land by border guards. West Berlin, under the control of the Allied powers, was a successful country with a booming capitalist economy. After World War II, the West rebuilt and started to thrive. They built back up their economy and created a modern city. There was lots of money in the economy and people had plenty of money saved in the banks. West Berliners were given 6 weeks off from their jobs for vacation, during which they would take lavish vacations and travel. They were laid-back people who did not always like to work. They had short hours and lots of holidays. However, some were motivated to work hard because the more you worked, the more money they earned because of capitalism. The people drove fancy cars and had nice things. West Berlin had great theaters, art, museums, and nightlife. The people of West Berlin lived a far more luxurious life than those who lived in East Berlin. The communist East Berlin was very underdeveloped compared to West Berlin and had only 1/3 of the population. Under communism, everyone made the same amount of money no matter what your job was or how much work you put in. An equally distributed salary between the entire population meant that people did not bring home a lot of money and there was a great deal of poverty in East Berlin. Because of the low wages, most of the women in East Berlin worked. The availability of resources was very limited, and when they were available, they were not great quality. People would often have nicely decorated houses on the inside because there was no resources available to fix up the outside of the house. Victor Bruman, a resident of East Berlin, said that communism has an economic effect of poverty and starvation in the East. The government also regulated everything and made very strict laws. They lacked freedom of speech and voting laws. Alexandra Schmidt, a woman who lived in East Berlin, said in an interview she wanted to live in the West and experience freedom. East Berlin had a secret police called the Stasi. They would listen in on people's phone conversations and force people to spy and snitch for them. The government also owned the majority of land and businesses. For the most part, life was not great in East Berlin. After 28 long years, people were finally allowed to freely pass between East and West Berlin. Peter Millar, a reporter from East Berlin, says he can still hear passionate voices of people, and it is hard to describe how crazy these people are, as they are able to cross the border. Student protests and riots pressured the government to take the wall down. An international press conference was held, and they determined that Germans would be allowed to pass freely between East and West Berlin. The government had originally announced that the wall was open for private trips only, but the news of the wall being open spread around East Berlin rapidly, and thousands of people gathered at the checkpoints of the walls demanding to be let across. The guards were forced to open the checkpoints by the mass of people gathered at the wall. November 10, 1989 was the official day the Berlin Wall was opened. As the people rushed to the wall, they celebrated and left the east as fast as they could. Some even started to physically take down the wall. The fall of the wall symbolized the end of the Cold War and the end of communism, and also the start of a capitalist government for Germany. On October 3, 1990, East and West Berlin were reunified as the Federal Republic of Germany. The East continued to stay underdeveloped because instead of trying to improve life in the East, most people just left and went to the West. The West continued to be a successful part of the city. However, they did encounter serious overcrowding. Anatoly Chernev stated that the fall of the wall ended the era in the history of the socialist system. The Berlin Wall left many impacts on the country, some of which still stand today. There still remains a small section of the Berlin Wall which is now a tourist attraction. 2 years after the wall came down, the Soviet Union fell. Alexander Schmidt moved to the West Berlin after the wall came down and described the West as having better job opportunities, and the economy was still one step ahead of the East. The western side continued to thrive and prosper more than the east side, even after the wall came down.